So in a room of this size, typically, 40% of you will be really excited about AI, and the other 60% will be deadbeat pessimists. A year ago, if you asked me the same question, the stats would have been about 20% being excited about AI and 80% being entirely pessimistic about AI. What's also true is that 65 to 70% of the people in this room will have their marriage fail due to communication problems. So young people nowadays are finding ways to avoid marriage, fat and sit, life partners, cohabitation, and everything in between. But it's not about the marriage. It's about bad communication. Similarly, 50% of startups generally fail because of an unvalidated market need. And so people sit in corporates and they daydream about being their own boss. But they don't realize that the probability of them succeeding is less than 50%. And it's not about the fact that you're being a startup. It's about the fact that you've unvalidated a market need. Unfortunately, also 100% of the people in this room will be disrupted because of AI. 100%. And so that, while that number is 50-50 now, in a year's time, it's going to be 90-10. And it's not about the AI. It's about what we do to respond to the AI that matters. And so typically, whether or not you're talking about your profession, your marriage, or your business, all of those things take substantial amounts of time to build. There's been books written about the 10,000 hours. I'm sure you've read them, right? It's a principle of how much effort you put in to get a particular outcome. And so today we're going to talk about time. But not only the time it takes to build these amazing things, also about the time that's lost in the process, the time that slips away. I'm very lucky to be a father, husband, and all-round ninja. And when I think about life, I think about the year 2012 with my two kids, and I spent lots of lazy afternoons with both of them perched on my lap, and we'd talk nonsense, and there would be goos and gahs and oogles and aggles. 2012, just being a few years ago, I fast forward to today where I can hardly make time to go see my son play a basketball match or my daughter do her ballet because we're struggling with this issue of time. And so time typically is the one thing that we want to take and want to make into value, and because of the stage of life we find ourselves in, we tend to prioritize it over many other things. Unfortunately, some of you will have experienced loss or tragedy. And at the end of your life, or at the end of one's life, the reflection is always about how you spent your time. And what's also most important is that cell phones, mobile devices, they've tricked us into being able to capture lots and lots of photos in an attempt to convince ourselves that we're spending quality time, where we're actually not. And so it's really important to understand that capturing these memories is one thing, but the greatest use of technology is not in simply capturing more memories. It's in our ability to give us time back to be more. And I put it to you, to be more human. And so when you think about the phases of life that all of us go through, it's really interesting reflection, because we tend to go through 4 very simple phases. The first one's about exploration. Between the age of 0 to 25, all of us are asking the same questions. We're trying to figure stuff out. And what's interesting when I look at my kids that are in this particular age bracket, we know that they're fighting to do one thing, is to speed up time. My daughter, who's 9 years old, is always daydreaming about being 18. And I say to her, slow down. My son, who's turning 12, is always dreaming about being 21. I'm saying slow down. But in this particular age, exploration is about how we speed up time to get to this unrealistic end goal. When we're now in the middle 20s to the 40s, it's all about acceleration. At this stage, a lot of people are trying to create time. Those of you that are in side hustles wish you had 48 hours in a day because you want to do all the things you want to do and some. So when you're in this phase of your life, while you're acquiring knowledge and skill, you're trying to figure out how do I create more time to do more things. And we also know that when you're in your 40s to your 60s, you're generally reflecting, and we're trying to slow down time. I turned 40 last year, and I started realizing the benefit and the luxury of nothingness. The luxury of nothingness. When I go through a weekend and I don't have a birthday party to attend, I don't have a pitch to prepare for, I don't have a business meeting, that's the best luxury for me. And so in my age group, I'm trying to slow this thing down. And then for my parents who recently retired to Zambia, they wish they could freeze time. They wish they could bottle all the memories by putting them in a cupboard and taking them out, ingesting them to make themselves feel better, and just freezing time so they can appreciate it more. So this notion of time is very interesting and important because it doesn't matter at which phase of your life that you're in, the brain works in a very simple way. The brain works in onboarding information through a cognitive process. So whether you're freezing time, whether you're creating time, whether you're speeding up time, your brain is finding ways to hack your current situation. So we call it a cognitive load because you're learning new stuff, and the learning curve is how you go from not knowing anything to getting into the thickness of trying to find out something new, to get into the plateau of what we call mastery. And so when you go through this process regularly, it's a combination of, yes, your brain working over time, but it's also you being able to apply yourself to a particular discipline for a long enough period to be able to reach mastery. Now, everything that needs to be learned needs a new cognitive process. So if you're sitting here today and you're trying to figure out how to become a fly fishing expert, you're going to have to spend some cognitive time understanding how to work a fishing rod. Sorry to tell you. If you're sitting here trying to think about how you're going to be the next paddle champion at your local country club, it's going to take some time and a cognitive load for you to figure out how that's going to happen. And so these cognitive loads that we've been carrying are part of the reason why time slips away all the time. And depending on where you are in your life, you need to ask yourself this critical question, is as we spend our lives learning how to make good use of time, when time desires only one thing, is for us to make good use of life. And so it's a very interesting principle when we consider how those two things are interrelated. It's almost the yin and yang of our current day reality, how we use time to be able to enhance life and the role that technology plays in making this happen. So what does this mean? What does it mean from an AI perspective and the acceleration thereof? Is it a problem? Is it an opportunity? Are we scared? Are we excited? In most cases, people are feeling very differently about this whole change and evolution in AI. What's very clear is that if we look back through the annals of history, every time there's been a significant change in technology, there's always been fear. If you think about headlines where you see people fighting against teachers because teachers were once upon a time convinced that they would be taking children and derailing them into believing things that weren't taught in the home environment. We think about the advent of novelty of reading. Whether you believe it or not, Socrates, right in the beginning, thought that by introducing the written word, you'd make the human brain lazy. So he pushed back against writing and reading. Socrates was one of the greatest philosophers at the age of the invention of writing, was against the advocacy of technology. The same principle applies today. We think about the social media era, we think about the AI era that we're in now. It's a new technology which you're either going to push back against, or you're going to find a way to help you create more time. And so when you think about the printing press, which was invented and started spreading great news across the world, or propaganda, some may say, it's also spread widely consumed panic. People could start using the print to be able to spread false rumors, sagas, and be able to convince people's brains. Now, for those of you that follow the politics, especially the politics of the day in the US, you realize that the social media and the internet are no different. The recent polls were won by podcasts. Podcast is a very modern form of print media and now accelerates people's understanding as well as misunderstanding of key topics. So we need to make sure that as we understand the acceleration, we're very well aware of the pitfalls. Zuckerberg was coined by creating a very simple rule called Zuckerberg's Law. That law was the fact that people that got onto Facebook for the first time would create double the amount of content every single year for every year that they were on Facebook. So that meant that that orange line that you see would tend towards an invisible line called the vertical asymptote, those of you that are mathematicians. So it goes towards an invisible line, but it never touches it. And as a mathematics person, you'll know that that is called tending towards the vertical asymptote until you get to infinity. So what does that mean? It means that the amount of content created in this world will become almost infinite. But our human ability to consume it will always taper out. So when you have this dilemma of absolutely anything and everything you can consume, and our poor human brains not having the way or the wherewithal to be able to consume it all, it also creates a very interesting opportunity as far as technology is concerned. When we also consider that the case for us to be optimistic is that all of this content is sitting on servers, hard drives, and different environments. And now we've got this computational capability that turns that into power and information. Those of you that binge on Netflix don't have to go and flick through the entire catalog. Why? Because you log on and Netflix says, because you loved watching Peppa Pig, I recommend that you watch this, right? Because you know our kids use our Netflix platforms. So it's doing a simple thing. It's using computational power and the oodles of information available about your consumption habits as well as the catalog of Netflix movies available. And it's short-circuiting the fact that it's giving you a cognitive break from searching through all of that to be able to get straight to the value that you need, because it's saving you that valuable thing we call time. So what we all need to understand is while there's lots of doomsday and there's lots of things that we need to be worried about, we need to see the good in what is happening around us. We need to appreciate that all of us are facing very similar challenges in one or other life stage, and seeing the good is appreciating what AI can actually do for us. And for me, it's quite simple. A couple of years ago, for the first time, I bought a new iPhone, and I put my old iPhone next to my new iPhone. I turned the new iPhone on. The old iPhone asked the new iPhone if they wanted to merge, and I pressed a button, and the data simply swapped, and I had my old iPhone on my new iPhone. The only reason that was possible was because of what we called APIs, application programming interfaces. It's the ability to create new value by connecting unrelated things and being able to present that as a solution. If we think about the age of AI and we consider ourselves as the centerpiece of a myriad of information, consider yourself a creator of new value. By plugging into the correct AI platforms, you can bring two unrelated things together to create something new, something wonderful, and something that can potentially change and move our continent forward. It becomes critically important because what happens next? We're using all this great technology, it's helping us to save time, and I always say that there's a profound call to action that we all have in our continent at the moment. It's a profound call to action that I defined when I left Facebook. While I was at Facebook, I was always super inspired by the computational power I saw every time I went to Building 2 in Menlo Park. I used to go there and I used to literally just walk around because at that time, there was something like 10,500 software engineers in one building. It was more software engineers in one building than Africa was producing as a continent at that time. And all I'd hear when I walked into Building 2 was just the sound of people clacking on their keyboards. Absolute silence, headphones, slurps of sodas every now and then, and everyone just on their keyboards. When I left Facebook and I decided to start my own endeavor again, I thought to myself, there's something very important I need to solve for this continent. It's how do I create the same level of concentration of talent, but in an African context? And with that came a lot of challenges. The first challenge is that kind of talent is expensive. The second is, for them to join you, they need to believe in something far bigger than coming to work to just type on a keyboard. And so I started a journey of trying to articulate something that was bigger than myself, something that could be able to join the dots and allow us to attract the best talent. If you're a historian and you like to look at what things happened in the past, you'll be aware of a date ominous in Africa's history. And 1886 was the year that Colonel Bismarck at the time got all the superpowers of the world together, and they decided they were going to colonize Africa. So in 1886, I put a pin in the map and the time of Africa's existence, and I say if we fast forward to today, effectively that's, call it a 200-year gap. And when I used to interview software engineers and think about people joining our team, I said to them, our key challenge with using technology is to try and bridge a 200-year gap in 10 years. So every time we choose to build a piece of technology, you ask yourself the simple question, is this just another shiny thing that's nice to have, or is it going to fundamentally help us to close a 200-year gap in just 10 years? And that became important, because otherwise, if we don't have a clear North Star, we end up doing lots of interesting things, but absolutely nothing that becomes impactful. And so when you think about what technology gives us as an opportunity, there's three key things. It allows us to be more efficient. AI at this point in time, if you're using it well, those of you that have started experimenting with ChatGPT and the like, it allows you to be hyper-efficient. It allows you to be more creative, and I'm going to build a case for that because a lot of people think that by going onto these platforms, it actually detracts from creativity. And the third thing is it allows us to optimize our time and our lives. If I'm going to spend more time courtside watching my son shoot three-pointers, it means I have to find better ways to optimize my life. And so let's look at research that's been done at the moment. If you look at MIT Technology, they're trying to ask the critical question, does AI make humans more or less creative? By show of hands, who says more creative? By show of hands, who says less creative? Split room, right? That's always the case. But early research gives us some indications of what potentially AI and the integration of humanity can do. We're talking about convergence today, right? Let's talk about novelty and utility. In that research study, they define novelty and utility around originality and usefulness. So originality, those of you know the Dolos wave breaker, which is a technology invented right here in South Africa by a gentleman called Ernest Mowbray, and he was pretty much in 1963 trying to solve for a very simple thing, is how do you break the waves in Port Elizabeth before they devour the city of PE, right? So that's quite useful, one would argue. It's still used today. And then you think about usefulness, practicality. A spatula that's also a serving tool, right? So you can flip your eggs and you can serve them at the same time, or you can serve that bean salad. So you think about novelty and usefulness as the definition underpinning MIT study for what they're trying to understand to be the contribution of humanity and AI to whether they become creative or not together. The experiment is very simple. They divide a room into three groups. So if I had group 1, group 2, and group 3 at the back. With those three groups, they give them very simple tasks to achieve. The first group has to achieve the task without the use of ChatGPT. The second group can only use ChatGPT once, and the third group can use ChatGPT as much as they want. They then give them three things to do. Write a story about an adventure on planet Earth, a story about an adventure under the sea, and a story about an adventure on a different planet. So group 1, group 2, and group 3 start writing these stories. Group 1 can't use ChatGPT, group 2 can use it once, and group 3 can use it as much as they like, right? What is the interesting thing that comes out of this? They review this output with 894 people. So 894 people take the collective stories and they start assessing whether these stories are novel and whether they're useful. And each reviewer gets a random set of 6 stories to establish this. And so the people that are reviewing it effectively are trying to establish whether they believe that it's novel and that it's useful. After that, the findings are quite fascinating. The first finding, which I thought was quite interesting, is that 88% of the initial groups 2, and 3 who were allowed to use AI, all of them opted to use it. 80% opted to use it. So when given the chance, most people will use AI. The second thing is that people with the most AI access, which is group 3, had the stories with the most creativity, right? So those that had the most access had the most creativity. And the third thing, which is also interesting, is the least creative people on step 2 had the most significant improvement in creativity, right? So the baseline they asked for creativity is for people to describe the environment around them. And the baseline for creativity is if you happen to describe your environment, ma'am, as stage, black dude, speaker, clicker, then maybe you're not so creative. But if I asked you, ma'am, to describe your environment, and you said crystal ball, and you said methamphetamine, and you said fly to the moon, then you, ma'am, are probably more creative than you are. And so that baseline was what they're talking about here, when the least creative people in the second step became more creative when they started to use AI. And then the fourth thing is that the most creative people in the step 2 were least affected by improvement in having access to AI. Basically, it says that AI has got a leveling effect. It makes those that are least creative at least okay from a creative point of view. But it makes those that are most creative very little impact. So if you happen to be painting the Sistine Chapel, AI is likely not going to help you much. So for Mozart and those guys who are geniuses in their craft, AI won't help them much. But for the average human being, which happens to be the balance of our planet, AI will have effect of lifting the floor. And I think that's a really exciting prospect if we think about our businesses and the things that we have to solve for. According to ChatGPT, we're right in the beginning. We know OpenAI has been investing hundreds and thousands of dollars in being able to understand where we are when it comes to humanity and its use of AI. And over time, when you think about early innovators to laggards, we are right in the beginning, according to OpenAI. We're right in the beginning because we see all sorts of shifts happening within media. Those of you that saw the DeepSeek announcement, and then most recently the Grok announcement, every single week there'll be a new AI being launched, and it'll be cheaper and more accessible, much like we saw with social media. And so we're right in the beginning of this journey, which means that you could be right in the beginning of creating fantastic and new value. So in your spaces and in your places, try and figure out how you can apply this to be able to be ahead of the curve. Because I guarantee you, if you're not going to do it, someone else will do it to you. And so what I really love to end off with is just how you help yourself manage the science of overload. We spoke about the cognitive load that we all face. So for us to continue to try and use the same amount of cognitive energy that we could be reinvesting elsewhere is not a smart endeavor when we've got AI to assist us. Last year, at the end of the year, I was blind for 5 weeks. And that was a really interesting time. I've got a condition called keratoconus in both my eyes. So my cone is shaped, my cornea is shaped like a cone, not necessarily like an oval. And so what that means is without my contact lenses, my vision is minus 20. So I had to be without my lenses for 5 weeks. And this was a really, really anxiety-inducing period because I couldn't work, I couldn't read, I couldn't see the expressions on my children's faces. I couldn't recognize people as I walked past them in the mall. All I could do was consume audiobooks. And that gets a bit boring. Now, in that period, I realized that I was going to find ways to still maintain the levels of productivity that allowed me to show up. So after I emerged from my spiral of depression, I only knew what depression was after that. I never knew what it was. But when I emerged from that, I realized that actually I could find ways to make myself 10x more productive and half the time I spend in doing the things that I shouldn't be doing. And so when I got my eyesight back and I got new lenses in, I've been on an endeavor to try and figure out how I can optimize my time. And I've got 5 very key things that I do for myself that I never used to do that now allow me to be able to spend 30% of my day doing the things that I should be doing. And so what AI does for us in general is it shifts the cognitive load. I have to spend a lot of time analyzing spreadsheets, reports, data, and research. I found a tool called Perplexity that helps me to do that within split seconds. I found a tool that allows me to have a debate with it regarding what it's reading and what I think. It can consume 100-page essays and give me a point of view that I can critique immediately. So that 100 pages that I had to read, my average reading time is 2.5 minutes a page, is a lot of time. So I shift that cognitive load onto the AI and I engage with it so that I can get a better outcome. I think about it as a co-pilot to what I need to do. Once I've formed a point of view, I always give an input as a prompt into what I think it should give me as feedback. That feedback is structured enough for me to know whether it's on the right track or the wrong track. And I figured out how to now inch it in the direction that it helps me to solve the problem I need to solve. The last thing is that automating my routine tasks. It's so funny. We run experiments all the time around how to get better at doing what we need to do, but we seldom make those things practice. So I have to find myself writing new articles. I have to find myself thinking about new topics to speak about. I have to find myself assessing my team to see how they're doing. And all those tasks which are routine, I've now found hacks that AI helps me to do and to do them very quickly. What that does, it allows me to show up prepared and ready, but it also allows me to reinvest that time in the things I should be doing, getting to know my clients, getting to know my teams, and being a great father and a great husband. The last thing we also need to understand is our ability to process loads of information will be enhanced by AI. Those of you that aren't using it already, try and download a version of something and play around with it, because you'll be surprised at around how close we're getting to actually achieving reasoning. ChatGPT have released a version called O that says that it can actually reason with you. And it's interesting when you do the early stages of reasoning with an AI tool. The capability is improving, but it's not quite there yet. And then when they introduced Grok as an AI, which I played with last week, I asked it what the square root of 634,363 is, and it gave me the answer in 3 seconds. So it's starting to understand how to do these things very quickly. And so we need to understand how that improves our decision-making, but most of all, boosts our creativity. I don't spend a lot of time trawling through things I don't need to be trawling through. I spend the time using that information to make critical decisions as our business. So what's the bigger picture? If it's not about AI, what is it about? It's about creating time for the endeavor of creativity, about deepening the opportunity to engage as human beings. It's about amplifying ingenuity, which is simply the definition of how we're able to take intelligence and be inventive with that intelligence. And it's about reinventing how we can use cognitive balancing to be able to focus our energies on what we need to be doing and downplaying the things that we shouldn't be doing. So I'll end off by saying that technology should be a servant, not a master. The greatest gift of technology that it can give us, especially AI, is time. And if it's not doing that from you, then you're doing it wrong. Thank you.